Today I'm going to talk about, would you believe, radio. And it's a day of celebration and a year of celebration because radio for entertainment has been used and has been broadcasting now for just 100 years. 1922 was the year that the first entertainment broadcast took place. But let's have a look back even before that. Back in the 1800s, the scientists had figured out that you could send messages, data, not really data, electricity through the air by using radio, but they couldn't really capture it properly back in the 1800s. It was around about 1900 that they started to build specialized equipment for communication and using Morse. And you know, when the Titanic went down in 1912, that was clearly a huge disaster, but they used Morse code, dashes and dots, da-da-da, So radio was used for communication in those really early days. Now, as I was saying, the first voice transmission was in 1906, but entertainment radio, they really didn't get the technology down until the late, about 1918, 1920, they finally got the tubes and the valves and were able to determine frequencies at which radio could operate. So the first radio station in America started off in 1920. Really, it was a spin-off from Marconi that had done a lot of pioneering work, but now they needed to sell radio sets. So the best way to do that was to really get the public interested in radio, which is exactly what they did. So KDKA went to air, partly to sell radio sets, but also started this revolution in broadcasting. At around about the same time in the same year, in 1922, there were the first entertainment radio broadcasts in London as well. So let's have a look ahead. During the war years, the 1940s, radio obviously was used for communication. It was used for many other things, you know, propaganda and all of that, via shortwave, big antennas, long distance shortwave, trying to get messages to the other side. It was also the period when they developed radar and sonar and other variants that use radio, two-way radio as well. But then, after the war years, radio became much more of a form of entertainment. A lot of jazz was broadcast. You can see these old sets, the brown wooden set, sounded great. Big wooden box, big speaker in it, turn it up, it sounded fantastic. So there were lots of really amazing programs going on in terms of jazz. But the Americans were really doing well. They started to play pop music. But before I get to that, very quickly, just having a look at my list here, you may not be able to see that in the 1950s and 60s, transistor radios came into being. FM started in the 70s, streaming on radio 1993, 1994, and digital radio started in 1995. But let me just move on. Here is a broadcast tower, a set of towers. This is in Nakhon Sawan. The BBC used this to send shortwave into India and into China, and they can redirect it, and it's amazing. Big antennas, low frequencies, long distance. But on the left is our radio antenna for FM. Shorter distance, smaller antenna, much better. And at the top, that's what you use for your mobile phone. And these as well use radio. Very short distance, very high frequency. The antenna fits inside your mobile phone. So this is incredible how the technology has developed over the last 100 years. Wolfman started a revolution making broadcasting fun, entertaining. Meanwhile, in Europe, many radio stations broadcasting through government. And where I come from, the UK, we had the BBC back in the mid-60s until Radio Luxembourg started in Luxembourg. They had the biggest transmitter on the planet. Again, big antenna, low frequency, long distance, you could hear it all over Europe. But also the revolution led to pirate radio, like this. Up in the top right is Radio Caroline, down in the bottom left was Radio London, the two big pirate radio stations broadcasting from ships to try and persuade the government to get a little more exciting about their radio. Now, Radio 1 eventually came on the air. In fact, the offshore radio stations were outlawed. They were made illegal. Only one station stayed on the air. That was Radio Caroline. But Radio 1 and the BBC changed all of its radio services to, obviously, you've got the pop and you've got Radio 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 6 now, and many more services as well. So the revolution continued. And then back in the 80s, I couldn't resist it. I went to work on Radio Caroline, which was going in the mid-80s, and that was about 1986, 1987. This was my home for 18 months. We were on and off the ship. And that's me on the left there. And you can see the weather got a little bit choppy, but we were playing pop music. The station had a resurgence in popularity and was rocking. It was doing really well. Now, you remember I was just saying, government radio, BBC, sounded dull and boring. Well, meanwhile, in Singapore, the Singapore Broadcasting Corporation was also dull and boring to listen to. And what happened? An entrepreneur went over to Batam Island and set up a radio station on the island of Batam, broadcasting on FM, and they beamed the antenna around to Singapore. Everybody in Singapore started listening to Zoo 101.6. In fact, I went out and had a look at it. It was an interesting setup. And then at the end of the 90s, well, Singapore and the Indonesians, they reached an agreement, well, they didn't close down Zoo FM. That's actually still broadcasting. But in Indonesian now, the English language stopped. But MediaCorp started in 1999. And of course, now they have all the lovely radio stations, very similar to what happened in the UK and Europe. So what about surf? I don't really have a lot of time to talk about my time in Thailand. I came out here in the early 90s, did radio, nearly got arrested by the army during the coups, but that's side issue. I semi-retired here about 7 years ago. Surf 102.5 was running, but it had, well, not many listeners, zero advertising, and a very heavy electricity bill. So there was clearly a job that needed doing there. And I met the owner and we agreed to work together. And now Surf 102.5, you know, is doing much, much better. But the problem was, how do we build a radio station when there's no money? Well, I bought a Playout System, upgraded some of the equipment and the antenna. And this is our Playout System. You can see the songs are in green, the commercials are in purple, and we have the BBC News as well at the top of the hour. You can see at the top of the BBC, we divided a clock. Most radio stations have a clock, and we have one as well. So we have news, and then local news or tech chat at the bottom of the hour. And so we decided to build this, and after a while, the Marriott came on. They put some money in, paid for our morning DJ, Steve. Steve on the right used to work with British Forces Radio, also out in Dubai, and lives here in Hua Hin, does our morning show, courtesy of the Marriott. So we try to involve a lot of people on the radio station as well. Stations picked up, we've now got the Surf Radio Breakfast, which is very popular. In the afternoon, Andy Curtis worked at RTHK in Hong Kong, and then came to live here a couple of years ago and does our afternoon drive. We now have sponsorship from the Sheraton. So this has been the secret, is to involve local business, give them a platform that's affordable, and go out and meet them. We invite people to come on board and come and have a chat on the radio. You know, we've got Kuntawan up there, we've got some funny character over here down the bottom, and we've got a few other people as well, all local people who make up the whole community of Hua Hin. And this is what the radio station is really about. So that is Surf 102.5. We continue to want to communicate and be a part of the community, have a great advertising platform for local people. Very quickly, where's it all going to go? Digital radio is the only form of broadcasting in Norway. They turned off FM. AM radio is basically finished. But I do think that podcasting is going to develop further, and radio stations are great people for making podcasts. You know, they'll make them, broadcast them, and then you can make them available online. So you can obviously get involved with the radio. You can find your podcasts. We're also doing a YouTube channel now as well, which is again about talking to local people, called VOA. So we're complementing the radio with podcasts and for video. And that's about it. I think it's going to be an interesting future and an exciting future. And thank you so much.